Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com. Yesterday I discussed how failed sea level rise predictions were being altered to push them out into the future. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in this video. In 2017, the US government published these sea level projections. The highest projection had 2 meters of sea level rise by the end of this century, and the lowest projection had 0.2 meters. The science is so settled that they have an order of magnitude uncertainty. In the 2017 report, their projections start to diverge around the year 2000. But as of last year, their doom and gloom forecasts were not doing very well. This is the official graph from NOAA as of May 2021. Sea level rise at Lower Manhattan and at all other northeastern United States tide gauges was below the lowest scenario. In other words, humans are having no impact on sea level and their models were failing rather badly. The lack of acceleration in sea level rise wasn't going to scare anyone, so sometime over the past year, the Biden administration altered the projections. They said they did this in preparation for the 5th National Climate Assessment. Their projections from the year 2000 to the year 2020 failed rather badly. What they did was they pushed the divergence date out 20 years to the year 2020 in order to give themselves another opportunity to scare the public. Now they can still try to scare people with their ridiculous sea level rise scenarios. I got into a discussion on Twitter this morning with someone who insisted that Greenland was melting down very rapidly. I asked him where all the meltwater was going because there's no indication of an acceleration in sea level rise over the last century. If there was an acceleration, there would be an upwards curvature in the graph. This graph for Boston, Massachusetts is fairly typical for long-term tide gauges around the world. There's no upwards curvature. So Jim Bowers responded with this graph for Boston's sea level and said, "Sorry, this shows acceleration." Let's take a look at what was done with this graph. The first thing I notice is that they hid all the data before 1970. And then they fit a curve to it which probably has nothing to do with reality. Let's take a look now at the deception which the author of this graph is attempting to make. This graph from NOAA shows the mean 50-year sea level rise rates at Boston, Massachusetts. Sea level was rising much faster in the 50-year period centered around 1950 than it has been over the last 50 years. But by hiding all the data before 1970, they could create the appearance of an imaginary upwards curvature caused by global warming. I'm not sure who made this graph, but it's typical of the fraud and deception behind climate alarmism. The reality is that sea level at Boston is rising at about the same rate now as it was 100 years ago. I decided to make a few projections of my own using the standard techniques of climate science. This is Zen, Lightning, Ruby, and Sakura. I just took this picture a few minutes ago. They're all between 600 and 700 grams right now. And I made some projections of their future weight. Climate experts say that animals are shrinking due to global warming. So according to climate scientists, animals in Africa must be very small. And during the very hot Jurassic, animals must have been tiny. According to Gerald Cudney, I don't have the educational background necessary to question the science. I've learned recently that the brilliance of climate modelers trumps all other fields of science and engineering, including geology and paleontology. Despite my lack of formal climate science training, I decided to try an experiment. This picture from last June was Toki and Upala at about 3 weeks. I measure the puppies' weights every day and plot them out in this graph. They're growing at a rate of about 1 kilogram per month. Assuming no upwards acceleration, in 10 years they'll weigh 120 kilograms, and in 100 years they'll weigh 1,200 kilograms. In my high scenario, the puppies will completely take over the Earth by the end of the century. And remember that I'm using the same official techniques as government climate science. In other words, I'm making up complete nonsense, just like the US government does. But before I finish this up, I'm going to show you some actual science in this graph. Toki and Upala are shown in the dashed lines. They were from a litter of 2. The 4 new puppies are smaller, most likely because of competition for space inside the womb and current competition for milk. I'm guessing that when they're fully grown, the 4 new puppies will not be as large as Toki and Upala. This is because the trends for the 2 litters are diverging. It's difficult to get global warming true believers to listen to any actual science. Perhaps I should make up some sort of official-looking seal and slap it on my slides. True believers of the global warming scam seem to respond very favorably to appeals to authority. Toto's been pulling back the curtain on this nonsense for the past 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki, Upala, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.